Third-generation entrepreneur Stephen Woessner, host of the Sell with Authority podcast and CEO of Predictive ROI, knows the secret to business success is more than just selling. It's about building genuine connections. From nuclear missile silos to running a thriving agency, Stephen reveals the game-changing strategies that transformed Predictive ROI from struggling to successful. If you're tired of pushy sales tactics and want to learn how to truly connect with potential clients, this episode is your blueprint for business growth.
Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to this episode of the Podcasting Secrets Show. Today, my guest is Stephen Woessner. Stephen is the CEO of Predictive ROI, and his business supports more than 90,000 digital agencies out there. And he has a wealth of knowledge to share with us today. Thanks for being with us, Stephen.
Oh, Nathan, thanks very much for the invitation. Very kind of you. Okay, I got to ask you, incurable creators. What does incurable creators mean?
If I had to use one phrase to describe myself, it would be an incurable creator. I have to be creating something or I die. From my hobbies of growing things, I have an orchard with about 90 trees in it and a greenhouse and a garden. I just love to grow and create, to creating businesses and being an entrepreneur. It's just part of who I am. And a lot of entrepreneurs describe that themselves that way as a creator. And then a lot of those people end up becoming content creators because that same passion for creation flows through as well to podcasting and other mediums.
Amen to that. Well,
how about you, Stephen? Are you a creator?
Oh, for sure. And I think you hit the nail right on the head when you mentioned entrepreneurs. I think that we share that gene, if that's a gene, right? I mean, because typically...
Or that sickness, one of the two.
Right. As Michael Gerber would say, right? That entrepreneurial seizure that he described in the E-Myth. But I think there has to be some level of creativity. I think there has to be a huge level of risk tolerance. I think it's the jumping out of the airplane without a parachute and trying to figure out, like I think of the scene from the Penguins movie when they all jump out of the airplane and they're like, okay, Captain, now what? You know, they don't have parachutes or anything like that. They're trying to stitch together these boxes as they crash to the earth and they find a life raft or a bouncy house or whatever, and they all survive. And anyway, but I think that's a little bit of the entrepreneurial vision and or maybe nightmare, is that we do create something out of nothing. And though then sometimes it can become challenging to focus on the one thing. Once we've been at it a while, like what's the one thing, like what's the best promising well that if we can just continue drilling that well, we're going to either strike gold or hit oil or natural gas or whatever the element is, but that's where success is. And I think that's tough.
Yeah, that point that you're making is so critically important. The analogy that I use is very similar to the one you're talking about. And I tell people, okay, if you had a gold mine and you had 100 different people digging different places in your gold mine, and all of a sudden one of your people hit gold, what are you going to do? Right? What would you do in that scenario?
What would I do in that scenario? Well, I probably would double down on that vein of gold that was just found. And also I would then concentrate my efforts around wherever that gold was just found to see if I could pick up an additional vein or maybe even something a little bit larger, right? Because we know where the gold is. So I'm going to narrow my resources or application of those resources and go an inch wide and a mile deep in that spot.
That's right. That's exactly right. Find the vein of gold and then just put the resources, all of the resources you can into mining that vein and expanding that vein and finding related veins, that same kind of thing.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about you and your family and your hobbies and your passions?
Well, okay, since we're talking about entrepreneurship, I'll take it literally into DNA. And so I think I'm an entrepreneur literally because that is part of my bloodline. My grandfather grew up in Istanbul, Turkey, when he was the ripe old age of 8. So this was 1910 when he was 8 years old. My great grandfather, so my family on my mother's side is Greek. And this was not a good time to be a Greek male living in Istanbul because of the ethnic cleansing and the atrocities by the Ottoman Empire. They were sanctioned by the Ottoman Empire back in that time. And so, and it wasn't just Greeks, it was Armenians and lots of non-Turkish, unfortunately. And so my great grandfather was murdered on the streets of Istanbul, and my grandfather, at the ripe old age of 8, became the man of the house. And back in the day, it was up to him to take care of his mom and his 2 younger siblings. And I believe in my core that at that time in 1910, our family's DNA changed in an instant. And so, he started selling newspapers, doing all the things, had the dream of coming to America at some point. At 18, he got the chance, came to America, and wanted to own his own restaurant. And 6 years later, after working the night shift, cleaning vegetables, doing whatever he could to save his money, 6 years later, couldn't speak the language when he got here, had $10 in his pocket, Nathan. 6 years later, he owned his own restaurant in downtown Canton, Ohio.
Right.
And
what kind of restaurant?
Kind of a family style restaurant. Back in the day, sort of counter service, fresh soup and a sandwich for a nickel. I like to say that my grandfather invented the original value meal, right? Made soup and sandwich for a nickel. Wasn't fancy, but it was enough. And married the woman of his dreams, had 4 amazing kids. Of course, I'm biased because that's my mom, my aunts, and my uncle, and then 10 grandkids. And I'm one of the 10. And we've all been business owners in our own rights, like various industries and that kind of stuff. So I truly believe that I carry the entrepreneurial gene, from good stock. So that's a little bit of the story. But I've been in the agency business now for 30 years. Predictive ROI I've run for 10. And I own it alongside my business partner, Eric Jensen. And we're pretty pleased with the community. And we consider it a privilege to be able to serve the number of agencies that we get to serve on a daily basis. It's quite an honor.
So today, the day that we're doing the recording is Veterans Day.
Right.
And you and I were talking a little bit before about your connection to the military. I have a son that's serving in the Army right now, and I'm wearing my proud Army dad shirt. Can you tell us a little bit more about your service and how that impacted your journey?
Yeah, growing up, my grandfather on my dad's side, so my dad's dad was in the Army Air Corps during World War II, which then, of course, became the Air Force shortly thereafter. My uncle, so my dad's brother, served in the Air Force during Vietnam. And my mom's brother served in the National Guard, Army National Guard. And so when I say it was kind of family business, sort of, right? I mean, a few of the men that I looked up to growing up had served. And so I felt a deep sense of pride in their service and also the desire to follow in those footsteps, so to speak. And also, I knew that while serving, if I really applied myself, I could also go to school and I could do all the things and hopefully leave after 4 years of, service after high school, and will have served my country, will have learned something new, maybe saved some money along the way, and hopefully, had gone to school. And so during my service, I didn't move around very much. I went to Texas for basic training. I went to Illinois for on-the-job training, so to speak, and then wound up in nuclear missile silos in the prairies of South Dakota. But I loved every second of it. Every day was like 100% pure adrenaline. And that's where I learned my love of systems and troubleshooting. In one instance, troubleshooting under fire. You typically don't want fire in a nuclear missile silo. So that was an eventful day. So all joking aside, I learned that, okay, the benefit of making quick decisions, the benefit of making decisions based on data, the benefit of following a process, following a strategy, following a schematic, following the process flow. So, those 4 years in the service were fundamental to where I am today.
I love it. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
You are a host of a podcast, the Sell with Authority podcast. Can you tell us more about your journey to become a podcaster?
Yeah. And so that goes back to 2015, May of 2015 to be exact, Nathan. So my business partner, Eric, and I, we came back from meeting with one of our clients. We were on a trip, and that meeting went not so awesome. We ended up losing that client. And so we were in a situation that many agencies find themselves in from time to time. A whole lot more people and not enough revenue to cover costs. And so we had to make some decisions. And so it was one fateful afternoon. It was May 15th, 2015 to be exact. I'm sitting at my dining room table, looking out the window, watching my daughter play in the sunshine and not a care in the world. And I'm thinking, what in the world am I going to do in order to get business development really jump-started for Predictive? And so I had this grand strategy, Nathan, that I was going to launch a podcast. We were going to call it Onward Nation. It was going to be the best business podcast ever. And people were going to listen to it. And then they're going to pick up the phone and say, we want you to do our stuff, like our marketing. That was the strategy, which of course isn't much of a strategy, but that's what I thought was the strategy. Anyway, so long story short, about a month or so later, we launched that show. And it was a daily show. It was a daily show for about 500 episodes. And then this really weird thing happened. Listeners didn't reach out to us and say, hey, how's about producing me a podcast? Our guests were. In fact, one of our guests, a podcast that we still manage today that we launched 10 plus years ago, reached out to me and said, hey, that Onward Nation thing's going pretty well. Could you do that for me? And I'm like, do what for you? And he's like, seriously, could you launch a podcast for me? So we did. And it became the Build a Better Agency podcast. And it's still alive and well today. And we still manage and produce it today. Awesome. And then several others. And then we started proactively reaching out to some of our guests. And pretty soon we had a podcasting production business that essentially saved predictive ROI. And we did that for about 3 years, 2015 to 2018. And then we decided that it was going to be really important for the future of the business for us to get more strategic in helping agencies plant their flag of authority and build an authority position, the right strategy for that was channel agnostic, not just podcasts. And that's where we are today, in helping agencies, grow their audience, nurture leads, and increase sales in a more holistic and comprehensive way.
And how has your business evolved from that? Are you still primarily focused on podcast production?
No. In fact, it's a very, very thin slice of what it is that we do. On a monthly basis, it's less than, it might be 7 to 8% of our revenue. And so there's a few shows that we still produce because these are our longstanding clients. We love these clients. They are strategic partners. We're very ingrained in their business and them in ours. But it's as I mentioned to you in the green room, it's been years since somebody, since we've had the opportunity or wanted to launch a podcast from scratch. We just don't do that any longer because we're focused on the larger, more holistic business development sales process. Podcasts is a very valuable tool in that overall mix. But now when we think about growing somebody's audience, which a podcast is a great way to do that, we now think about, okay, how can we specifically get this agency deep into a niche, build an email list that we can start nurturing leads and then helping them with their sales process. So they're super easy to say yes to. And then it drives, ROI for them, hopefully quickly.
Yeah, I love that point. When people go down this route of this podcasting business model, this content creation business model, their email list generally becomes their greatest asset. And so you've built a business around helping people grow that list and nurture that list and sell to that list. Can you teach us what are the most important strategies or steps that our listeners need to take to successfully build and monetize through an email list?
So the first one, and your audience might not like what I'm going to say, and that is, and it's kind of sort of a pun, I guess, back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. But we wrote a chapter on this, Drew and I, in our book, Sell with Authority, and that is narrow is where the gold is. And so oftentimes we find agencies, you mentioned the 90,000 that are in our community. Oftentimes we find agencies that are trying to boil the ocean, or they're just blindly casting nets over the side of the boat, hoping to catch a fish for dinner. And the good news is sometimes they catch a salmon. They catch that exact right fit client that they were looking for. And then other times they catch a boot. And so we believe that going narrow, niching down, and we have several different lenses or ingredients or filters in that recipe to use. But the more narrow you go, the more likely you are to strike gold. Now, that does not mean that an agency has to focus on, well, geez, Steven's telling me that I can only work with dentists, for the rest of the life of the agency. Or we can only work with, healthcare organizations for the rest of the life of the agency. No. In fact, Scorpion is a brilliant example of this. So if your audience wants to go to scorpion.com, we have no financial affiliation with Scorpion. They are not a client of Predictive ROI. I've interviewed their former chief marketing officer, Corey Quinn, a couple of times. But this agency grew from $20 million a year to $150 million a year because they smartly applied a digital model to private injury attorney, law firms. And that's what got them to $20 million. And they're like, boy, we are really good at solving this business issue, lead gen and, web development and, whatever else it was. But we're really good at solving these 1, 2, or 3 things that PI firms really need. And then they smartly said, what other industries need that exact same model without any change? What other industries need that exact same model? And sure enough, it was like home services and a whole bunch of other things. So they knitted that all together, $150 million a year agency. But they got super narrow on the business issue and challenge that their clients needed them to solve. And they solved it with excellence across a number of different verticals, if you will. So going narrow is where the gold is. Scorpion went really narrow on the business issue, not necessarily industry, but business issue. So that's the first step.
Okay. I love that. And really valuable. I've made that mistake before where I've created a business that was too broad. I created a business about family, right? And when you're all things to all people, it's pretty hard to get ads. It's pretty hard to connect with people because you're not, most of what you produce, most people don't care about. And when you focus on dentists, right, then it's a lot easier to connect with a dentist when you're reaching out to them because they know that you're focused on the nuances of their business.
100%.
Podcasting Secrets is brought to you by Pod Allies, the done-for-you podcasting services solution. When I speak with CEOs about their podcast, one of the most common comments that I hear is that they know they need a podcast, but they don't have time. Have you ever wondered how some businesses find a way to still run their podcasts while juggling their crazy day-to-day operations? The secret might be simpler than you think. Let me introduce you to Pod Allies. This is a service that's changed the game for businesses in the podcasting world. Pod Allies is a done-for-you podcast production and marketing service. They understand that while many businesses understand the immense value podcasting can have for their business, finding time to produce, syndicate, promote, and monetize a show can be challenging. Pod Allies offers a dedicated team to handle virtually all aspects of your podcast production. From strategy and branding to audio and video editing and guest scheduling, they've got you covered. They even take care of creating blog posts, transcripts, and syndicating your content across multiple platforms. What sets Pod Allies apart is their use of PodUp, their proprietary podcasting software suite. This allows them to streamline the entire podcasting process, saving you time, effort, and a bunch of money. If you're ready to become a thought leader, connect with your audience, and grow your business through podcasting without all of the investment of time and cost of doing it yourself, Pod Allies might be the perfect solution for you. To learn more or to schedule a free consultation with a podcast expert, visit podallies.com. That's podallies.com. Now back to the show.
What's your next step in building an email list?
So the next is have a point of view that makes you different. And so, again, we wrote about this in the book, and that is what separates you from the sea of sameness. Why that's important is because at some point, you're going to be sharing content with your list. So how does it stand out? Last week, we taught what we call our 2-day intensive. So every March, July, November, we teach a 2-day intensive for our clients, and then we invite some guests. And it was awesome, not as a self-aggrandizing, like, ooh, we're going to pat ourselves on the back, but there are a number of different guests who were in that room, virtual room, Zoom, who commented, we were teaching about like how to write good emails. And several people were like, oh yeah, we love your guys' emails. And we assume that Stephen writes those, which is true. And they feel like conversational, they're hopeful and all of that kind of stuff. But that's our point of view. And our point of view is that we believe that most agencies go about business development and sales in the least effective, most painful way possible. We think there's a better way. We call it the Sell with Authority methodology. And so I would want your listeners to actually create a point of view that separates them from the sea of sameness. Because when it comes time to share content with their list, it has to be different. If it's generic, pablum, vanilla content, it'll get deleted, unsubscribed, whatever, right? So they have to get really clear on first the niche, where they're going to go narrow, and then what makes them stand out from the sea of sameness.
Who are some people that you think do a really good job of that?
Gosh, I think there's several. One, you and I were talking in the green room before you hit record about Russell Brunson. I think he does it brilliantly well.
Yeah, I agree.
Another, I would say, is Dan Martell. I think does a great job.
Yeah.
Taki Moore, I think, does a fantastic job.
Okay, Stephen, what's the next step in building a successful email list?
Yeah, so then once you're really clear on niche, you think you've got a good point of view dialed in. I know that I'm going to sound a little bit biased here, and your audience can go to our website. They can go to our resource library, which is predictiveroi.com/resources. There's 19 different things in there that are 100% free. One of them is called the How You Help Guide. I would encourage them to download it, and here's why. The How You Help Guide is going to include what we call the transformational triangle, something that we learned from Taki Moore from Black Belt, which I think is just a brilliant instructional design model. And the reason why we love it is because it helps then somebody get really clear on, okay, this is who we're going to serve, the niche. This is how essentially we're going to talk about it, the point of view. And then the transformational triangle will help them sort out the three biggest issues, pain points, business challenges, whatever word you want to use, that you know your audience is struggling with. And it needs to align with your business, right? So like you have this duality in your business, both podcasting services, and then also there's like a SaaS side to your business, the tools for the do-it-yourselfers and whatnot. But it would make no sense for you to be talking about finance or something. Maybe at some point it would, but it's not core to your business today, right? And so, So like the three business issues or challenges that from your point of view that your prospects are dealing with have to then align with your business. Like you can help them solve that. Access to capital, if you're not in the capital markets or a PE firm or a VC or an angel or something like that, probably shouldn't be one of those. So 3 business issues or challenges that you can help them solve. So that would be the next step. Then after that, it's then getting into the nitty gritty of tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Apollo.io, in building lists of people that align with that criteria, and then moving them into your CRM and doing a proper warm-up.
So what are your best strategies to actually do that, to take them from a cold email address to being a subscriber on your list? Do you use lead magnets to do that?
No. We do. Our resource library has 19 of them, like I mentioned before. So if somebody comes to Predictive, they can certainly find a wide swath of helpful resources just for agency folk, right? And then and we taught this in full transparency during our July intensive for everyone who was in the room. So if anybody happens to be listening now that was in our July intensive, this will sound familiar. We don't wait for the subscribe. We don't wait for the opt-in. We actually go to LinkedIn. We build a list that aligns with the niche and so forth. And then we use tools like Apollo.io. We use those tools to move them into our email list. Now, some of your listeners might say, holy bananas, you got to be joking. How you're like committing whatever against CAN-SPAM. And I would actually encourage them to read CAN-SPAM, because what CAN-SPAM says is completely different than what most people believe that it says or reads. And here's what I mean by that. In fact, I promise this is not a gotcha question. Nathan, so spam, we mentally think that spam is like, spam email, but it's actually an acronym. Do you know what the P in spam stands for in CAN-SPAM?
I do not.
Pornography.
Oh, goodness.
Right. Pornography. So I'll share this with you after we finish our recording. I'll send you a link to the United States House of Representatives and the actual CAN-SPAM legislation. And I promise you, cold email is not part of what you can't do as a result of CAN-SPAM. Here's what CAN-SPAM was intended to stop. The proliferation, or using the A in CAN-SPAM, the A is assault, in using pornography and sending pornography to children and sending misleading and dubious marketing to seniors to try and fleece them out of their money. That's what CAN-SPAM is intended to stop. Protect our kids and protect our seniors, not from sending cold email. In fact, CAN-SPAM goes on to document that in order to send a cold email to somebody who hasn't subscribed, you need to follow 3 criteria. One, you cannot have a misleading subject line. You cannot be trying to dupe somebody into something like, buy this car, and then it takes them to a porn site. You cannot have a misleading subject line, first. Second is you have to have an unsubscribe link. You must. Surprisingly, there are still platforms out there today that don't have an unsubscribe link as standard. Like, what? Anyway, you have to have an unsubscribe link. And then third, you must include a physical address of the sender. As long as you check the box on those three things, as any good marketer would, send the cold email.
So do you just create that list of email addresses and just add them to your list and they just start receiving?
We do. Yep. And then also we are very strategic about their first experience with Predictive, or if we do this for a client. So we're very specific. We take great care in creating a warm-up sequence. Sometimes it's 3 emails, sometimes as many as 7, in making sure that their first experience that Nathan has with Predictive ROI is a really good one. This is not a, hey, was lunch fun? Yeah, lunch was fun. Hey, what are you doing next week? Nothing. What do you want to do? How's about we get married? I mean, that feels ridiculous, right? In a social situation, it's ridiculous. And of course, in a business situation, it's ridiculous. So we take great care in warming up the audience and then having a strategy for long-term nurture before any sales or lead gen activity can take place, because too soon feels way too yucky. Just like in a social situation, feels way too yucky.
What are some of the best strategies to warm them up and nurture them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, you're pulling all of the good stuff, Nathan. Emails 1, 2, 3, or emails 1 through 7 should be sharing something helpful. And what I mean by that is, could you take them to a podcast episode? Sure. Take them to a podcast episode that you know is going to be helpful, not a generalistic episode where it's just yap for 30 minutes, right? Take them to an episode that you think aligns with your point of view and also the niche that they're in. Take them to a free training. Take them to a free training with like a video free training and then a bonus framework. Take them to where they can just download a framework. Take them to a super helpful blog post about the business issues and challenges that you were just talking about. Take them to a LinkedIn video. Take them to a variety of things that says, hey, Nathan, I actually get you. I actually understand this space, but not from a self-aggrandizing perspective, because nobody needs that in their inbox. Instead, speak to the business issues and challenges. This is not about pitching. This is not about talking about how smart you are. This is about teaching them something helpful so that when they read that email, they're a little bit better off than they were had they not read it. So if you get that right, you're in good shape.
Yeah, it's going back to your social analogy where you meet a cute girl and, businesses, they get a lead and they immediately go for the sale and they wonder why they have a 0.3% conversion rate, right? It's the same thing as meeting a cute girl and, like your analogy, asking her to marry you, in that first conversation. Instead, you've got to provide value. You got to take her on a date. You got to get her to laugh. She's got to have fun with you. You provide enough value over time, then hopefully you can get that person to agree to marry you. And the same thing's true with the business, right? The strategy you're describing, you provide enough value over a long enough period of time and they will trust you to do business with you. They'll want to do business with you.
Yeah, it's amazing how we forget all of the social cues, all of the social norms, what feels appropriate when you're developing a relationship. And all of that goes out the window when we need to make our numbers.
Yeah.
And as gross as it feels in a social context, it feels equally as gross, if not more, in a business context. So yuck, don't do that. It's schwarmy.
Yeah.
So that's the recipe in a nutshell, although we did get pretty specific, from end to end, everything from niche all the way through to how to structure a good warm up. And if your audience happens to want to see like specific examples of those emails, I'm happy to send them. We have an email writing like workbook, if you will, with a bunch of specific examples and that kind of stuff. So if somebody wants that, they can just drop me an email and I'm happy to send it to them. But it's very structured, very recipe driven and all of that. So super helpful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for adding so much value for us and for our listeners. Stephen, if our audience has enjoyed this interview like I have, and they want to learn more about you and your products and services, what are the best ways for them to do that?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. So Stephen Woessner on LinkedIn. My last name is good German last name is W-O-E. The O is silent. O-E-S-S-N-E-R. So W-O-E-S-S-N-E-R. So Stephen Woessner, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to find all of our stuff, and so much of it is free, you can order our book for free. And I promise it's 100% free. No shipping. You don't have to pay for any of that. We'll send you a paperback, our cost, 100% our cost. Or if you want a Kindle, we'll send that to you for free as well. But if you go to our resources library, which is predictiveroi.com/resources, you can get all the stuff, right? You can go in there and get it all, and it's all free. And so we hope it serves you well.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for being with us today, Stephen.
Thank you for the invitation, Nathan.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, narrow your niche. Focus on a specific business issue or industry to stand out and attract the right clients. Number 2, develop a unique point of view that separates you from competitors and provides real value to your audience. Number 3, build an email list strategically by understanding CAN spam regulations and creating a thoughtful warm-up sequence. Number 4, learn how Stephen's entrepreneurial journey evolved from his original Onward Nation podcast to his current business model. Number 5, discover the transformational triangle method for identifying and solving your clients' most pressing business challenges. Number 6, understand the importance of providing value first in marketing, treating potential clients like you would in a personal relationship. Number 7, explore how to use tools like LinkedIn and Apollo.io to build and nurture your ideal client list. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Secrets, and we wish you success in your podcasting journey. If you're looking for a great podcasting platform that integrates more than 50 different tools to help you create, grow, and monetize your podcast, I encourage you to go sign up for a free trial at podup.com.